Hello, this is Teacher Wayne, and I'm going to talk about and show you a game I've made using the PHASER game engine, and it's based on JavaScript. Well, loosely based on JavaScript. So here you are. This is an asteroid game I've made. It's got 2 levels. I've muted it because the sound was quite overwhelming and you couldn't hear me, so I've reduced that to make it a little bit more easy to play. It's got 2 levels, as you can see. Excuse me. Once you get to a certain I'm just showed basically what happens if you crash there. If you crash into a rock, it does die and reset your score, and there you are. So right, I've played the game now, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you roughly how I made it. So let's open up a let's actually open up the game I've made. I want to start with the basic one here and the stages I went through. This is a typical sort of setup using the state machine sort of, well, the state sort of system that PHASER uses. You have different game states, the code. And a game state moves from state to state to state as we play the game. Play the game, sorry. So in this particular game here, I've got a preloader state, a level 1 state, a level 2 state, and a menu state. And as you notice, it's got game.start state.start preloader. So it loads up the preloader, and in the preloader it will load up level 1, and level 1 will lead to level 2. And this menu is if we die and if we want to restart at any stage as well. So it's a fairly basic little setup I've got here. But this is the actual index.html file you're looking at. So this is an ordinary HTML file that's got this, it's got a div tag in it, and the game runs in this container here. We load up the scripts here. So as you notice, quite a lot of scripts. Each of the scripts, this is the game engine one, the phaser.mim.js, and these are the 4 game states I've got. I'm gonna add another one. You can see I prepped it in advance called died.javascript. I'm going to expand it and expand it and expand it. I set it to run in the screen in 800 by 600, it's quite small. Right, anyway, so how do I get there? So this is like a glimpse in the future. I'm sort of going to ignore that now. I want to come back to that later, but I want to show you something. If we go on the actual PHASER website, phaser.ai, and you go to examples, you get what's known as the PHASER free examples. Now, this particular demo I've been playing is using the PHASER 2 engine. And to be honest, I've stuck with PHASER 2. We'll be moving on to PHASER 3 at some stage, but the stuff I've been using is sort of back end of PHASER 2 when it was quite stable. So we've got a PHASER 2 examples here. There's loads of examples we can look at, but what I did is I just started from a little point of view, and I thought I want to make an asteroid game. How do I do it? And I was just looking through some of the sample code, and I found this here. And what this is, got a ship that you might recognize that ship from my game, and it's got a firing mechanism. In fact, it's got a very heavy firing mechanism. It's got no asteroids in it, but it's got some script for that. If you scroll down here, you get all the script. This is not using the game state, by the way. This is just ordinary PHASER JavaScript based coding. So I just literally use this code here, and I put it, if asteroid version 4, I put it in here. Now the stuff that I did is obviously got much more than this code here. I started with this code, and then I looked at finding asteroid assets, looked how they're moving around. But basically I used quite a lot of the code in here, like for example to get the sound effects working. I'll figure that out using the audio examples. So the best place to start to get your working code is do what I did. Come here, find some suitable, you have an idea to begin with. For example, I had the asteroid game idea, and I looked to find something. There's a Space Invader, probably if you had a Space Invader you'd probably find a Space Invader version here. If you wanted to play a Pac-Man, you could probably find something Pac-Man, or you can find elements. You can see elements in different ones. There's a brilliant platform game I found in here that I used in a previous sort of life when I was doing all this. So this is how you develop it. You reuse what's known as reusable code. You keep reusing code that works, and you start with it. I started with this and used it, and I played about with it. I looked at where they got the assets from, and I downloaded it. By the way, to get the assets, you scroll down to here to the bottom. Oops. It tells you where you can download it. You can download this zip, and it has all the actual code you need in here to download it. And this is PHASER 2.14. The version I'm using this demo on is 2.9.1. It's noticed it's actually a CE version, but that's the actual engine I'm currently using. But as you can see, there's loads of different versions. It's quite important you stick with the same version. I use 2.9.1. There's very little difference between 2.9.1 and 2.14. They're virtually identical when you're actually looking at the code on this page here. It's only when you get to PHASER 3 that I spotted you getting some major differences. The next thing you need to know when you're making games is you need to know what the API is, and I'll show you where the API is. This is for the API that I use for mine, which is version 2.9.1. It's actually, that is the URL for it here, and it shows you how you can do various things. An API is just basically the instruction set of how a specific JavaScript version that you're using and the PHASER game engine works at. So this is for the 2.9.1 game engine. Can you see it shows you how to set up the various game states? I've used even the same constructor using basic game because I wanted to keep it as simple, but if you want to, it tells you exactly how everything works. If you want to figure out how to do various pieces, and you can actually look here what the various different functionalities are, and you can use it, and some of them do actually give you some sample code, which I find very useful. Or you can just go online and look for specific sample code of how to do things, but the game one gives you some basic code here, and I have used this in the past, and this is great. So the API is always a go-to place to troubleshoot and diagnose. Here's where you get some of your sample code, and then you're going to eventually download it. You've got to host it obviously on a website, a web sort of system. I'm using the XAMPP here, as you can see, but WAMP works quite well. I'm using Apache server here, but there's no reason why you can't use a WAMP server if you're using Windows box or using Apache server on a Linux machine. It makes the odds really. What's good about PHASER is it's hardware independent, platform independent. It works just about on anything, which is the great beauty of that particular system. So let me go. So I've started with some code here. This is standard JavaScript code here. Now I'll go back to that in a minute. To run it, obviously JavaScript doesn't run by default. To run it, you just create a web page. I've created it test.here. As you can see, a script Asteroid version 4, and it just runs it on load. But this is not what's known as a multi-state thing. It just runs. Let me show you actually in here. So if I go to old and click, there's test.html there. Sorry about the sound of it. I'll turn that off because it's very loud. So that's what it looks like. There's no multiple levels there. When you die, you don't really die properly. It's just a simple little file I started with really to get it going. So that's what the a one state or one sort of file system I've got that just uses Asteroid version 4. But one of the beauties of using the PHASER is you get these multi-state things. So let me explain what a multi-state is. Each state, and if I go back to the index, each state is basically a separate script file. Each of these script files where you can have, for example, you have different levels. For example, I've got a level 1 script file, I've got a level 2, so that's my first level and my second level. My preloader is where I load all my assets in, and the menu is just a menu one that loads. I'm going to briefly go through my code. In some of the videos I've talked about this, but in this video I'm trying to link everything together a bit better, make it a bit clearer. So let me explain about this state system. So here's a sample code what it looks like. Each of the various state has three main areas. You have what's known as a preload, and the preload, the purpose of it is it loads all the assets. So it loads all your sprites, it loads up all your sort of audio sounds, and it sets the variables. So now generally speaking, this preload function, if you've got like a multi-level game, you only do this once, and I've actually created my own little state called preloader that loads it. If I click on the preloader state, here you can see in the preload function of the preloader state, it loads all the assets up here. By the way, all these assets come from the PHASER game engine. I've just used their sample ones, but there's no reason why you can't use your own up. I've created stuff on pixel art with little GIF animations. It's really quite straightforward, and you can create your own music as well. No difference for using that. So here I define all the sprites. These sprites here I've set the initial values, but these initial values get lost when you move to a new game state, but it keeps the variable without the very contents of it. And if you look here at the bottom, in the create function, all the create function does is start the next level. So the preloader state runs first, it sets all the initial assets, and then loads level 1. So let's go back to it again. So let's talk about these other two bits. So each state has these. You have a preload function. Now this preload function I've separated, as I've just explained. I put it in the preloader. So this doesn't exist in my other two ones, but there's no reason why it can't, because it could exist. Then you have a create and update. Now when you're creating multiple levels, these are the two that you're going to really focus on. The create, the best way I describe this is it's the starting place for everyone. It's basically it's basically where all the sprites are initially placed on the screen, where, for example, you've got a platform game, it shows you the position of the platforms. If you've got an asteroid game, in my case, it's where all the asteroids are spawned in. Nothing is animated or moving at this stage. Everything is put in place. The screen is set right size, etc. So if I go to level 1 here and show you the create, it sets the values of these variables, and then it actually sets various bits and pieces up. It puts some asteroid, it sets the physics, it sets the explosion, it gets the music started as a game title, puts the various sprites, and it actually puts in place, can you see 1 to 4 there, it places 4 asteroids in the game. So the create function gets everything set up. Now the animation, the update function does everything else. Basically this runs the actual level, the game, everything takes place. In here, usually speaking, is where we detect collisions. So for example, it's collisions between the actual bullets that you're shooting at your ship and the asteroids, so that the asteroids are destroyed and the score goes up. Another thing that we also want to do is your movement. We want to do the movement controls for the player and for the AI controls as well. So in other words, how some of the AI moves around. Also want to set that up. Yeah, and then another thing is you're going to have the update function. Usually lives the other function. For example, if you die, you score, and that sort of thing as well, etc. So if you die, you get a death one. That usually calls the menu for me. So when I die, it calls the menu, it resets the game, reloads it all up again. So this is the general structure here of a game state in PHASER game engine. So level 1 here, let's talk about. So that's the create function I've said. Here's the update. So as I said, it's the cursors here moves the character about, and also what happens if you fire the button. So it's quite a simple little update function here, but it's also got collision handlers here. So if it's got a collision between the bullets and the sprites, it does the collision handler. I shall show you that. So basically increases the score, gets them creates the explosion music, etc. You've got a collision between the ship and the asteroid. Basically you die. My ship dies, and it runs the menu for me. So basically I've got no health bar, but you could have a health bar at this stage and reduce some health. Screen wrap here is another function, because what we want is the asteroids and the bullets. So it's all like a wraparound, proper asteroid game where everything wraps around, creates that wraparound effect. And that is my first level really. I'm just quickly scrolling through it. And level 1 and level 2 are virtually identical, except I just changed the variables here, so they've got more asteroids to shoot, the 7 asteroids rather than 4 asteroids. That's one of the big differences. I've got a lot more work to do on this asteroid to make it a fully working game, and eventually I probably will have a play with it to get it working. But it's basically, that is how it works. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about is, if we look at this here, let's look at the structure of these codes. It's quite important you figure this out. If you look here, we've got this thing called basic game dot level 1 equals function game basic 1 dot level. This is not the normal way that JavaScript looks. JavaScript normally looks like you have a function then a name. Here you have the other way around. You have a name then a function. So it reverses the actual language a little bit, but the actual this bit is recognizable as JavaScript, but this bit I find different. I've also added these extra elements as well that actually help managing the game. Another thing you need to spot is whenever I don't use the word game directly here. For example, asteroid, I use the word game. You can't do that anymore if you're using states. You have to use something called this dot game. So I use a lot of thises throughout. Whenever I see the word game, I add the word this to the front of it. And it's the same thing for all the functions. There are little tricky things trying to figure it out. So that's another piece of information you might find useful. Another thing is, let me just quickly play the game, and I'm going to try to mute the sound because it gets very loud. Just give me one moment, please. There, mute that. So when I playing a game here, one thing you want to do, if I click inspect here, it shows you what we're looking at. And what I like to do is console. It shows you exactly what's happening. For example, this game is working. Let's break the game. So I'll go to Asteroids 4. I'm going to add an A to there. So and press Shift F5. Now it's gone black now. But over here, because I've got the console open, I can see reference error game is not defined, and actually you click it, and it actually tries to show you where the problem is. But it didn't quite work as I wanted then. Oh, 40. There we are. Line 50, sorry, there, game. So if I go here, I can simply change that there. If you make any mistakes, typos, semicolons missing, the best way to do it is there. Can you see it's now working? So if you ever get this black, what I call the black screen of death, always right click, click inspect, come over here and go to console and try to figure out what's happening. Can you see here? I do have quite a lot of warnings, but it doesn't really matter. One of the warnings is about the fact I've got an ad blocker. They're not really that important, the warnings, but the red ones are more important. But although this one here is not blocking it working, I think I probably missed a semicolon. JavaScript does work without semicolons. Don't exactly. Oh, that's another bit of code that's added to it. So this is not actually my code that's got the problem. It's a code that this library calls. Interesting, but never mind. So this is Teacher Wayne. I hope you enjoyed this little introduction and little overview of PHASER gaming. So just a quick recap before I finish. So we've got here a multi-state game I've been talking about. We have got, I've gone through the various different states. The actual structure and the definition of it all, the way that it says basic game dot level, and all your functions. You've got your three basic functions. You've got your preloaders, not in this one because it's already been defined in the preloader one, but you have preload, create and update in every single state, and you can have other functions that you can define as you want. I've got my preload in here because I'm only using it once, but for example, if I had a different level where I was using different assets, say I could do different asteroids for different levels, then I would use the preload in each of the levels and not leave it blank. But my simple little game, I'm only using one asteroid asset, but I could actually change that per level. I could have asteroid as being asteroid 2, for example, because I do actually have downloaded other asteroids. I could have different sound effects, different backgrounds, different weapons, all sorts of things. That's the beauty of this state machine. So anyway, that's one of the things. Also, another thing I discussed, just to go over it, is the API. Make sure you're using the right API for the right version. This is the API for the 2.9.1 CE one I'm using here, and it helps you, gives you sample code, explains how things work, helps you troubleshoot, and you get all your sample code. Well, I get all my sample reuser code straight from the PHASER example page, and have a look how they do it, and I modify it for my game. And I find that this is the best way to do game development, using the PHASER game engine. As you learn things, you're going to be reusing your own code, and I have reused lots of other code, but I think as a newbie, as a beginner, this is the best way to start. But anyway, this is Teacher Wayne, and I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.